It was just another quiet day at the hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed above as nurses made their usual rounds, and the sounds of beeping monitors filled the air. Room 302, however, was anything but normal. Inside, a young boy sat on the edge of the hospital bed. His mother, clearly exhausted, sat beside him, her eyes red and sunken from days without sleep. Two professionals stood in the room, a nurse and a caseworker, both skeptical, but polite. They were there because of reports of strange behavior. The boy had been growling, speaking in a deep voice that wasn't his. He had even threatened his family, they said, with words that sounded ancient. The nurse took a step closer. "Sweetie, can you come down and talk to us?" she asked gently. The boy didn't respond. Instead, he smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a child. It was wrong, wide, cold, empty. Then, without a word, he stood up, turned around, and walked backwards. Not on the floor, up the wall. The room went dead silent. His back arched unnaturally as he climbed. He reached the ceiling and stopped, still upside down, still smiling. His head twisted slowly toward them. The nurse screamed. The caseworker dropped her clipboard and bolted for the hallway. Moments later, doctors rushed in, but the boy was back on the bed, sitting calmly, as if nothing had happened. No camera caught it, but everyone in that room signed sworn affidavits confirming what they saw. They weren't family. They weren't friends. They were trained professionals, and they were terrified. That boy wasn't sick. That boy wasn't faking, and that boy wasn't alone. The doctors couldn't explain it. The hospital called in child services, and then, after they left the house where it all started, drew even darker attention. You see, this wasn't an isolated event. This was just the beginning. And soon, even the police would refuse to enter that house without backup. A priest would demand permission from the Vatican. Paranormal investigators would flee in fear. They called it the Demon House of Gary, Indiana. And what happened inside will make you question everything you believe about evil. Gary, Indiana, 2011. A once thriving steel town, now rusting from the inside out. Factories abandoned, streets quiet, rows of houses with broken windows and boarded up doors. A city forgotten by industry, by prosperity, and by hope. But one of those houses wasn't empty. It sat quietly on Carolina Street, tucked between two other crumbling homes. Nothing stood out. No signs of horror. Just a small, nondescript house with beige siding, a sagging roof, and an overgrown front yard. That's where Latoya Ammons, a single mother of 3, thought she'd found a fresh start. She moved in with her mother, Rosa Campbell, and her 3 children, a 12-year-old daughter and 2 sons. Aged 9 and 7, they didn't have much, but they had each other, and they hoped this new place would be a place to rebuild. After hard times and harder years, at first everything seemed fine. No strange sounds, no cold spots, no signs. Just the quiet of a neighborhood where most of the houses were empty. And maybe that should have been the first sign. The strange things started small. In the beginning, it was flies, a swarm of them, clinging to the screened-in porch windows. Hundreds of them. Latoya and her mother tried everything to get rid of them. They sprayed, they cleaned, they lit candles. But the flies came back every single day. And it wasn't summer. It was winter, freezing temperatures, No logical reason for so many insects. Then came the footsteps. They'd hear heavy boots walking through the basement at night, thudding across the floor, stopping right beneath their feet. Then silence. Every time Latoya's brother went down to check, he found nothing. No footprints in the dust. No signs of forced entry. The doors were locked. The windows sealed. It got worse. One night, Rosa Campbell was awakened by the sound of her daughter's voice. But it wasn't right. She walked into the girl's bedroom and found her levitating, hovering above the mattress. Eyes rolled back, her body stiff as a board. Rosa screamed. Latoya rushed in. Together, they prayed hard, and finally, after what felt like forever, the girl dropped back down. No one could explain it. The family tried to tell themselves it was stress, sleepwalking, a hallucination. But deep down, they knew something else had moved in with them. Something invisible. Something malevolent. Then the children started to change. They would speak in deep, unfamiliar voices. Their eyes would roll back into their heads. The youngest would sit in a corner, mumbling to himself, whispering to someone who wasn't there. And then he began describing that someone, a tall, shadowy man, with red eyes, who told him what to do. He said the man wanted him to hurt people, to hurt himself. Latoya was terrified. She turned to doctors, therapists, social workers. Some dismissed her. Some didn't believe her. But others, after witnessing the events for themselves, would never forget what they saw. One psychologist wrote in his report that the children were delusional. But that same psychologist would later say, "I've never seen anything like it. I don't know how to explain it." By the time they called in the church, it was already too late. The house wasn't just haunted, it was infested. One priest would later describe it as a place that feeds on fear, a place that holds on to you. Latoya and her family believed what they were facing wasn't just a ghost. It was something far more ancient, far more dangerous. They believed it was demonic. And as word spread, more people came to the house. Investigators, priests, police. Some laughed. Others stayed only minutes before fleeing. But many walked away, shaken, pale, silent, unable to explain what they'd experienced. One officer would later confess, "I don't believe in this kind of thing, but something was in that house, and it didn't want us there." This is the story of the demon house of Gary, Indiana. A case so terrifying it shook medical professionals, priests, and even police officers to their core. A haunting so well documented, it forced the Catholic Church to get involved, and an evil so persistent. It followed a family wherever they went, until a final exorcism was all that remained between them and oblivion. What happened in that house defies logic, defies science, defies everything we think we know about the world we live in. But every word, every sworn statement, every official report says the same thing. It was real, and this is only the beginning. The hauntings begin. At first, it was just footsteps. Late at night, after the children had gone to bed, Latoya would sit in the living room, trying to relax. But underneath her, the basement below, she'd hear them. Thud, thud. Heavy, deliberate. The sound of boots on concrete. Someone walking slowly in circles. She'd freeze, holding her breath, trying to listen closer. But every time someone went to check, the basement was empty. Nothing disturbed. No broken windows. No signs of entry. Just silence. and dust. Then came the flies. It didn't make any sense. It was January midwinter in Indiana. Freezing temperatures, snow on the ground, but every morning, without fail, the windows would be covered in flies. Dozens, sometimes hundreds, buzzing, crawling over the glass. Black bodies twitching. They sprayed. They swatted. They prayed. And yet, the next day, they'd be back. Sometimes, Latoya would kill them all before the kids woke up just to keep them from seeing. But other days, the swarm was impossible to ignore. The children would complain of headaches. One of them said the flies sounded like whispers. One evening, Rosa Latoya's mother was sitting in the living room. The TV was off, the room dim. She was folding laundry when she saw movement from the corner of her eye. She turned her head, and there it was, a dark figure gliding across the far end of the room. No footsteps, no face, just a silhouette, tall, solid, and watching. She screamed. But when Latoya rushed in, there was nothing there. They checked the doors, the windows. They were locked. But Rosa swore it. I saw something. It was there, and it was looking right at me. That night, the house felt colder. Not just physically, but in its presence, as if the walls were listening, breathing, waiting. And then the children changed. The youngest boy, just 7 years old, began sitting in corners, his face to the wall, mumbling. At first, they thought he was playing, talking to an imaginary friend. But when they asked who he was talking to, he'd whisper, "The man with red eyes." His brother became violent. He'd lash out without warning. His eyes would roll back into his head, and he'd growl like an animal. Not the way a child pretends to be a monster. This was different. It sounded inhuman. Their sister, normally kind and gentle, began speaking in riddles, sometimes in voices that didn't sound like her own. She'd sit up in bed in the middle of the night and say things like, "He's in the closet now," or "He wants mummy next." There were nights when Latoya would find all 3 children lying on the floor of the hallway, eyes wide open, unblinking, staring at the ceiling. She'd try to shake them, try to wake them. Sometimes it took minutes before they'd respond. Sometimes they wouldn't remember it at all. One night, Rosa said she heard footsteps again, but this time they were upstairs, coming from the children's rooms. She walked up slowly, gripping a kitchen knife. The hallway was dark, too quiet. She peeked into her granddaughter's room. The girl was asleep. Then she opened the boy's door and froze. One of them was standing in the center of the room, back arched, head tilted all the way back, eyes white. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. Then, suddenly, he dropped to the floor and crawled toward her at full speed on all 4s, like an animal. Rosa slammed the door and screamed for Latoya. When they opened it again, the boy was in bed, sleeping. They started keeping lights on at night. They stopped using the basement altogether, and Latoya began writing down everything, every sound, every word the children said, every strange bruise that appeared on their skin, like finger marks pressed deep into their arms. The family was breaking apart. No one wanted to stay in the house, but they had nowhere else to go. And worse, they began to feel like leaving didn't matter, because whatever was in the house could follow them. One afternoon, the middle child began speaking in a deep voice, raspy and unnatural. He told his mother, "It doesn't want you here. It wants us. You'll see." And then he smiled. That same smile, the one she'd seen in the hospital, the one that didn't belong to her son. Neighbors started whispering. They'd seen lights flickering late at night. They'd heard screams. But no one came to help, not yet, because even the strongest skeptics hadn't witnessed what was about to come. Not the doctors, not the police, not even the church, but they would. Very soon they'd see for themselves, and when they did, most of them would run. This haunting wasn't over. It was only escalating. Things escalate. By early spring, the house no longer just felt haunted. It felt hostile. The energy shifted. Whatever was inside that home wasn't hiding anymore. It was attacking. One night, Latoya heard a crash upstairs. She ran to the boys' room and found her youngest son, only 7, sprawled across the floor, sobbing, his back slammed against the closet door. He wasn't playing. He wasn't hurt from falling. He looked like he had been thrown. The boy trembled as he pointed across the room. "He pushed me," he whispered. "The tall man. The one with the deep voice." But no one else was there. The air felt heavy. Wrong. Latoya pulled him into her arms, but the boy just kept repeating it. He said, "You can't stop him." The middle child was even worse. He'd sit on the couch for hours, completely still, his eyes locked on something no one else could see. And then he'd start talking, but not to himself, to someone else. "Yes," he'd whisper. "I'll do it, just like you said. They won't stop me this time." His voice didn't sound like him. It was deeper, flat, emotionless. Once, Rosa asked who he was talking to. The boy stared at her blankly and replied, "The man. You don't hear him." She didn't sleep that night. Eventually, Latoya couldn't take it anymore. The children were having violent outbursts, losing time, speaking in strange voices. They'd wake up covered in scratches and bruises, some shaped like claw marks. No doctor could explain it. No prayer seemed to stop it. She was afraid for her children, afraid of her own home. So she did the only thing she could think of. She took them to the hospital. It was supposed to be a safe space. But what happened next would become the most terrifying moment of the entire case. A nurse, a doctor, and a Department of Child Services caseworker were all present in the exam room. Latoya explained everything. The voices, the attacks, the bruises. Most didn't believe her, but still, they agreed to observe the children overnight. It was quiet at first. Too quiet. The youngest child sat on the hospital bed, calm, almost eerily so. The DCS worker asked him some routine questions. Then, without warning, he turned. He looked directly at his brother and whispered something no one could hear. And then it happened. The middle child stood up, his eyes wide, his lips twitching. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. Instead, he walked to the wall backwards, still facing the room. Then he placed his hands against the surface, leaned back, and climbed. He walked up the wall back arched like a spider backwards, all the way to the ceiling. When his body reached the top, he turned his head and looked directly at the nurse, and smiled. The nurse screamed and bolted from the room. The DCS worker backed up against the wall, eyes wide, frozen in place. The child suddenly dropped back down to the floor and stood calmly, breathing steady, like nothing had happened. A few seconds later, he sat back on the hospital bed and refused to speak another word. Security was called. Doctors rushed in. They asked the boy how he'd done it. He didn't answer. Latoya, exhausted and shaking, begged the doctors to believe her. But she didn't need to anymore, because they saw it too. Every adult who witnessed the event, nurse, caseworker, and physician signed written affidavits that night, confirming what they saw. These weren't relatives. These were licensed professionals, trained to spot mental illness, abuse, and trauma, and yet none of them could explain what they'd just seen. The caseworker later wrote in her report, "I have never seen anything like it. That boy walked up the wall backwards. I am not exaggerating. He didn't run. He didn't jump. He walked. Like gravity didn't matter." After that night, the Department of Child Services removed the children from the home, citing concerns for their safety. But removing them didn't stop it, because the activity followed them even to family members' homes, even to the shelters. The voices, the growling, the bruises. It was as if the entity had latched on. This wasn't about a house anymore. It was about them. Police began looking into the situation, and their findings only made things worse. They discovered that the basement, where the first footsteps had been heard, wasn't ordinary. It had a hidden room. Under the stairs, behind a makeshift wooden panel, officers found what looked like a small shrine. The dirt had been dug out by hand. Buried inside, a woman's press-on fingernail, a pair of women's underwear, and a child-sized sock, as if something had been sacrificed there. At this point, the case was no longer just local. Word spread. Reporters began calling it the Demon House. Priests were contacted. Paranormal investigators arrived. Even skeptics admitted this wasn't normal. This wasn't mental illness. This was something else, and still, the horror wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Police and CPS involved. After the hospital incident, after the boy walked up the wall, authorities could no longer ignore the Ammons case. Child Protective Services officially opened an investigation, and the Gary Police Department got involved. At first, the lead detective assigned to the case, Charles Austin, thought it was just another report of a struggling family. Mental illness, neglect, maybe some kind of trauma. He didn't believe in demons. He didn't believe in He'd been on the force for over 35 years. But that would change. CPS sent investigator Valerie Washington to accompany the officers. Their task, inspect the house, interview the family, and determine whether the children should be permanently removed. It was supposed to be routine. It wasn't. The moment they stepped inside, something felt wrong. The air was thick, still, oppressive. Everyone noticed it. Officer Austin later described it as walking into a wall of static, like the air had weight, like you were being watched from every direction. They began with the basement, a place that had always made the family uneasy. Now it would unnerve even hardened officers. Beneath the stairs, they found something bizarre, a small hollow dug into the dirt floor, like a makeshift grave. Inside, a few odd items: a woman's press-on nail, a used pair of underwear, a worn child's sock, plastic wrappers twisted into strange shapes. It looked like ritual offerings, something meant to bind or curse. Suddenly, one of the officers standing near the furnace shouted. He had just taken a photo, and his radio exploded. The casing popped open. The internal wires were melted. No heat source was nearby. No fire, no reason. Seconds later, Another officer's recorder malfunctioned, the digital file wiped clean. When they later tried to play it back, all they heard was static and a deep voice whispering, "Get out." Back upstairs, Valerie, the CPS worker, reported seeing something move in the shadows. A black mass darted across the living room and vanished into the walls. She turned to the children's bedroom and saw something that stopped her cold. On the carpet, burned footprints. They weren't from shoes. They weren't from bare feet. They looked clawed, three-toed, long, pressed deep into the floor like something heavy had stood there on fire. She took photos. The officers confirmed what they saw. Then, without warning, the bathroom light exploded overhead. Glass shattered across the hallway. The door to the basement slammed shut so hard it cracked the frame. One officer drew his gun. Another screamed. Valerie turned and ran toward the front door, ready to leave. But then she heard the youngest child crying in the kitchen. He wasn't with them. No one had seen him move. He was sitting on the floor talking to someone they couldn't see. "He said he's coming back," the boy whispered. "He's mad. He said he doesn't like you being here." Valerie backed out of the room slowly. She would later write in her official report, "I do not believe this was a hoax. I saw things that day I still cannot explain." Detective Austin had seen enough. When he left the house that evening, he sat in his car, sweating, shaking. He said nothing for several minutes. Then he muttered, "I didn't believe in that kind of thing. Not until I walked into that house." He wasn't alone. One officer refused to ever return. Another took leave from work. And Valerie Washington, she asked to be reassigned. A few days later, Officer Austin tried to print the photos they'd taken of the footprints and basement shrine. But every time he tried, the printer jammed. The computer crashed. The files corrupted. When he finally managed to print one, it came out with black smears covering the photo, like something was trying to erase it. The haunting wasn't just in the house anymore. It was following people, attached to anyone who came too close. A priest was called, not for blessing, but for full-scale exorcism, because, at this point, no one doubted what Latoya had said from the beginning. "There's something in this house, and it wants my children." That house on Carolina Street wasn't just haunted, it was hunted. And the next chapter would take them deep into Catholic rites, Vatican approval, and one of the most documented American exorcisms in modern history. But nothing, not even holy water, could prepare them for what would come next. The exorcism. After weeks of terrifying events, voices, levitations, claw marks, hospital reports, even police testimonies, there was only one thing left to try. An exorcism. Latoya Ammons was referred to Father Michael Magina, a local Catholic priest from nearby St. Stephen Martyr Parish. He had never performed a major exorcism before, but when he met Latoya, he knew immediately. This wasn't ordinary. This wasn't mental illness. It wasn't hysteria. It was something darker, something real. Father Magina began by interviewing the family, not just Latoya, but her mother and children. What he heard was disturbing. Growling at night, levitation, unexplained injuries. But what convinced him was this. He visited the house, alone. He walked room to room, prayed, and as he stood in the basement, he felt something wrap around his fingers, tight, ice cold. He pulled his hand back. Nothing there, but the feeling remained for hours. He didn't need more convincing. Father Magina conducted a minor exorcism on Latoya, a simple blessing ritual. Not yet officially sanctioned by the church, but it didn't work. The activity escalated. So Father Magina did something very few American priests ever do. He petitioned the diocese for permission to perform a full, formal exorcism, one that required approval from the bishop, and documentation of real demonic possession. And he got it. The diocese reviewed the hospital reports, the CPS statements, the police testimonies, and approved one of the rarest rites in modern Catholicism, an official Roman ritual exorcism. It would take 3 sessions. The first was in English, held at the church, quiet, careful, controlled. Latoya sat in a chair in front of the altar. As the priest began reading prayers, her body tensed. Her hands gripped the arms of the chair. Her breathing quickened. But the worst part, her eyes changed. Witnesses said her pupils dilated until her eyes looked completely black, and she began to growl. A low, guttural sound like an animal. She said words no one could understand. A string of snarls and clicks, like another language. Or maybe no language at all. Father Magina continued the prayers. Holy water was sprinkled. A crucifix pressed to her forehead. She screamed, a blood-curdling, inhuman howl that echoed through the sanctuary. Then suddenly she went limp, passed out. The second session was more violent. This time she fought. She thrashed, cursed. Her voice shifted, deepened. At one point, she looked directly at the priest and said, in a voice not her own, "You can't have her. She's mine." She convulsed so violently they had to hold her down. Her mother cried in the pews, clutching a rosary. The children waited outside. Father Magina didn't stop. He knew this meant the demon was resisting. But even demons get tired, and by the end of the second rite, she collapsed again. Then came the third session, the final one. This time, the priest came prepared. More prayers, more holy water, more authority. This time, he spoke in Latin. Exorcizuci, omnis, spiritus, immundi. I cast you out, every unclean spirit. And that's when Latoya began to scream. Not in pain, not in fear, in rage. She shouted in that same twisted tongue, her body shaking violently, her arms flailing like something was trying to pull free from her skin. Her head rolled back, and she laughed, a deep, unnatural laugh, from a voice that wasn't hers. The crucifix in the priest's hand grew hot. His assistant claimed he saw smoke rise from her skin where the holy water touched. But Father Magina kept going. He commanded the entity to leave. In the name of Christ, in the name of the Father, in the name of every sacred thing that darkness fears. And then, silence. Latoya collapsed forward, unconscious, barely breathing. The air shifted, the pressure lifted, and for the first time in months, the house was quiet. In the days that followed, there were no more voices, no growling, no levitations, no footprints. The children slept through the night. No more bruises, no more fits of rage. It was over. At least, that's what they hoped. Years later, Father Magina was interviewed about the case. He said, "I believe there was real possession here. Not just oppression, but something inside her. Something ancient and angry." He kept his notes, his recordings, his copies of the Vatican documents, and he made one thing very clear. This was not fake. This was not hysteria. Evil is real, and I've seen it. But for the Ammons family, Even after the exorcisms, the fear never truly left, because once you've looked into the dark and it looks back, you never forget the aftermath. After the final exorcism, Latoya Ammons and her children didn't wait. They moved out immediately, left the house on Carolina Street behind, and whatever had haunted them, it stayed. They relocated to a quiet neighborhood. No more growling, no more screaming, no more shadowy figures in the hallway at night. The children began acting normal again. No violent outbursts, no speaking in tongues, no visits from invisible people. Latoya finally felt peace. She said she would never return to that house. Not for money, not for answers, but the story didn't die there. Far from it. The house, 1120 Carolina Street, quickly gained a reputation. Locals began calling it the Demon House. Paranormal investigators, journalists, skeptics, they all came knocking. Most didn't stay long. Some claimed to feel sick the moment they stepped inside. Others said the temperature dropped 20 degrees when they walked through the door. One visitor collapsed on the front porch. Another began vomiting uncontrollably. Every room in the house felt off, like something was still watching. In 2014, the story reached Hollywood. Zach Bagans, the host of Ghost Adventures, heard about the case and was instantly obsessed. He flew to Gary, Indiana, did a walkthrough, and what he experienced inside left him shaken. Within weeks, he bought the house outright, paying $35,000 in cash. His goal? To document the truth, to find out once and for all, was it all in their heads, or was something evil truly buried beneath that house? Zach brought in psychics, priests, scientists. He set up thermal cameras, motion sensors, night vision, and he locked himself inside for days, alone. No crew, no communication with the outside world. And then, things got dark. He reported violent nightmares, disorientation, sudden aggression. His crew members started fighting with each other. One man suffered a mental breakdown and had to be hospitalized. Another quit the production and refused to ever speak about what happened. Zach himself said something followed him home. He claimed to feel cold touches in his sleep. He saw figures in mirrors. He heard voices whispering his name, just like Latoya's children had years before. When filming was complete, he didn't try to resell the house, didn't preserve it, didn't turn it into a museum. He had it demolished, completely, ripped down, brick by brick. He said it was too dangerous to exist. To this day, the lot sits empty. No structure, no plaque, just a patch of overgrown grass and a broken sidewalk, as if something had been erased from the world. But some say, at night, if you walk past the corner of Carolina Street, you can still feel it. That pressure, that chill, like something buried, waiting. Many still question what really happened in that house. Was it mass hysteria, mental illness, elaborate hoax, or something ancient that found its way into our world through a broken basement door? Father Magina, the priest who performed the exorcism, never changed his story. Neither did the CPS worker, or the police, or the doctors who witnessed a child walk up a wall. Too many eyes, too many reports, too many truths to ignore. Zach Bagans later released a full documentary, Demon House, and in it, he said something chilling. I wish I'd never gone in there. I got what I asked for, but it came with a price. Latoya has never returned to the spotlight. She keeps her location private, her family quiet. But in one interview, she said, "I know what we lived through. I know what we survived. I don't need anyone to believe me." And maybe that's the scariest part. Because if what happened to her really happened, then there's something out there. Something that can infest a house, tear a family apart, mock the sacred, and leave behind nothing but scars and silence. The house may be gone, but the story remains. And in the shadows of Gary, Indiana, maybe something else does, too. Some skeptics say it was all just a shared delusion. Mass hysteria. A family caught in trauma, misunderstood by a system looking for ghosts. But here's the thing. How do you explain a child walking backward up a wall, with a nurse and a CPS worker standing just feet away, both trained professionals, both signing sworn statements that they saw it with their own eyes? How do you explain police officers, hardened men, used to crime scenes, refusing to go back inside the house after what they experienced, or a Catholic priest, backed by his performing a sanctioned exorcism, and calling it one of the most disturbing cases of his career? How do you explain that many people, from that many different fields, all walking away saying the same exact thing? That house was evil. We may never know what really happened inside 1120 Carolina Street. The house is gone now, torn down, erased. But maybe that wasn't enough, because whatever was inside, it doesn't need four walls to exist. It doesn't care about bricks and wood and basements. It just needs someone to believe, and maybe, just maybe, it's still watching. If stories like this send a chill down your spine, subscribe to Dark Truths for more real-life mysteries that defy logic. Click like if you're still thinking about what really happened in that house. And drop a comment below. Was it real, or just a terrifying illusion? We'll be watching the comments, just like something might still be watching you. Dark Truths. The deeper you dig, the darker it gets.